Hi, so I just wanted to make a video today just talking a little bit about Labour's proposed cuts, benefit cuts and things like this, and the switch over from what they're calling the legacy benefits, ESA, PIP, all of that onto universal credit. And I want to just talk a little bit about humanitarian values and why they're so important and why Labour, where we stand with Labour, because Labour, they've lost their way completely and they don't stand for decent values anymore, and it's really important that somebody does. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about that really in this video. Part of the reason is I'm a carer for a disabled man, and he had a stroke when he was 18 months old. So as a baby, he had a stroke, and that absolutely messed up the left side of his body. You know, he had many operations on his left foot to try to sort of fashion something of a working foot. But they failed, really. They took bone from his right hip in order to try to lengthen the leg. They couldn't do it properly. They may as well have not done that at all, because the pain that his hip is in some days is unbearable, and they took too much bone. They promised him, or they promised his parents, apparently they weren't going to take, too much bone from that hip, but apparently they did. So, and his left arm spasms, and it's unusable, and it causes him an awful lot of pain every single day. And he doesn't tend to sort of moan about the pain. He just tries to have, just get on with his life. But there are days when he's really immobilized by pain, and obviously he's been through all the painkillers, that you can imagine, and all the rest of it, and he doesn't want to take too many of those because he also has liver issues created by probably, the medication that he's on, because he doesn't drink, etc. So it's a tough time for him. And what I see is a person who just wants to live with as much dignity and respect as care and care as possible, but the system has always beaten him down. And what a lot of people don't realise is the system became very, very cruel under the Tories. And I would say especially under Ian Duncan Smith, who I believe made changes to the system so that getting benefits became very difficult. And what you find is, if you've got anybody recently trying to get benefits, etc., what you often find is there's a massive application to get help, to get PIP, to get whatever help. You have to fill in, a 40-page document explaining your problems. That needs to have evidence, as you'd expect, doctors' letters, letters from specialists, etc. You send all of that in. Now, what would happen to him is you send it in, and then I think they reassess you every year or every couple of years. Well, in people with permanent health conditions that aren't going to get better, the assessments annually or every couple of years tend to be a horrific strain. You'd expect, wouldn't you, that they keep certain things on file so that you wouldn't have to start from scratch in every case. But that isn't the case. You do have to start from scratch every time you go back for a new assessment. You have to prove yourself all over again. And that's wearing, it's difficult, it's tough. Not everyone has an advocate, not everyone has a social worker who does it for them or who does an adequate job for them. The idea that people just get the benefits, the right benefits that they should be getting, is a myth. It isn't the case, So he'd send all of this off, and bear in mind, you're talking, 40-page document plus all the supporting evidence, etc., just to be able to live, just to be supported, which puts you in a very vulnerable position. It's very scary. It's tremendously stressful, because you're just worrying, if they decide to pull benefits, where will your next meal come from? Will you be made homeless, etc.? You should have support. It should be just absolutely a given. you know. But then, so you send all this stuff off, and then that should be it for a year or a couple of years. Well, one time with him, the system seemed to glitch. No idea why, but he had about 4 assessments in a year. And he'd try and say, look, I've had an assessment. I came up, I was okay, you know, I got through it, da, da, da. And they would say, oh, you came up on our computer again, so we have to assess you again. So literally gathering all of that evidence again from scratch, sending it off, bearing in mind we'd have to get it photocopied as well, because sometimes you send it in and it goes missing. And I found this myself after my mum passed some years ago, and I had to deal with the DWP. You know, they said there'd been an overpayment of benefits, etc. So I had to sort of gather evidence and find out how many nights she'd spent in hospital and things like this, and fill in a form and send it all off. And when I did so, I took photographs of everything I sent in, you know, in case I needed it. And then I also sent it special delivery. And when I saw it had been delivered, because I was mindful of the stories of this chap, and what he'd been through with the system, even though I could see it had been delivered on Royal Mail's website, I phoned up DWP and I said, oh, just wanted to check you've received it okay. You know, such and such a date showing received on Royal Mail's website, and they checked their records and said, no, we haven't got it at all. And so I said, okay, well, here's the date and time that someone signed for it, you know, according to Royal Mail. And then they told me, they said, when anything comes in the building, it gets scanned onto the system and then dropped into a folder. They said, in all likelihood, it's been dropped into the wrong folder. So sure enough, they were able to locate the right folder. It had gone completely to the wrong department, where it would have sat for months on end, unbeknownst to me, had I not chased it up. So then they were able to get it into the right folder and get it sorted. The whole thing, it's insane. The size of these departments, it feels very labyrinthine, and you know, you feel vulnerable. You're just a number trying to get something to the right people in the right way, you know. So, and if I found that a struggle, just getting something to the right department, doing that, you know, will you imagine that all the time pretty much, because that's what sometimes disabled people have to deal with. So he'd sent in all of these assessments one year, no explanation as to why that was reasonable, other than, oh, the computer, you've come up on the computer again. Well, why, for the love of God? How many more doctor's notes do you need saying he's had a stroke? It's a very visible disability. With some people, the disabilities are not so visible, you know. So that was extraordinary, and that was just that. And then now they're moving him to universal credit, and that's a problem, because that's happening to millions of people across the UK right now, is they're being moved from PIP and ESA onto universal credit. And it seems that many people are terrified. They're being treated quite roughly. In some cases, transitional payments are not working. So you'd imagine, wouldn't you, if you're going from one government department to another, and it's a case of just moving you over, you've already proven your disability, you've already proven who you are, all the rest of it, they've been dealing with you for the years, that it's just a case of porting you over on a computer, job done. No, it isn't so simple. So with the person that I look after, he was asked for ID checks. He performed these ID checks online. A passport, which he only ever got to prove who he is. He can't travel anywhere. And a driver's licence and bank statements, etc. Uploaded all of that. Then they say, okay, we will phone you and arrange for you to come in. Well, he says, well, I can't come in. And he's got, his NHS person who assessed him. He says, she's happy to back up, but I can't come in. Can you do a home visit? Which should be reasonable, right? So then he was assured, yes, you can have a home visit, no problem. Then he spoke to another lady who said, no. And this is after to get this alleged home visit set up. This is after his family phoned, and you have to hang around on the phone for a very long time to get through, etc. So then he spoke to another lady who said, no, you've been set up incorrectly. We can't do a home visit. You have to come in. And he said again, well, I can't come in. Can I please have this home visit? First of all, he'd wanted a telephone assessment. And they said, no, the computer says no. You can't prove who you are on the telephone. Bearing in mind, again, he's been in the system for many, many years. Should be a case of just being ported across. But no. So all of this palaver. So no, there can't be a telephone interview, ID check. Although many people are having telephone ID checks, the computer says no. And there seems to be no ability for a human to override the computer for any reason, And you're aware you're just a number in a system. All of these people he talks to, it's not like he has any history with them. It's not like they know him. They're probably all outsourced themselves. He's just a number in a system. So he's now waiting for a home visit. But after the last call, he was told very bluntly by some woman that, a home visit was an inconvenience for them, that you can only have a home visit if you can't walk at all. Well, I don't believe any of that is true. I think if you really struggle to mobilise, a home visit is absolutely reasonable. Also, why not a Teams call, etc.? Presumably that's what they did during COVID. Why not that? What are they trying to do to people here? Whose side are they on? Are they actively opposing helping people? Because ultimately this is about helping people, So I find it extraordinary, I really, really do. So all of this back and forth, including his family, and that's just to get the ID check sorted. To prove what? That he is who he says he is. And that's aside from ensuring that he gets any financial stability. Now, his last ESA payment is only a couple of weeks away, I believe. And then he's been warned by a couple of people on the phone. It almost sounds like a threat, honestly. He's been warned by these people, your payments will stop until we get you your ID checks. Now, there's something called a transitional payment, and the transitional payment is supposed to help people ensure that they don't have financial loss during this time, because people have bills to pay, they have a flat or whatever to live in, they have to get food just like anyone else. So he asks about transitional payment, and he's told no, that doesn't apply to you. That only applies to people that have been verified, that have had their ID verified. So I'm like, wait, what? So there's nothing to protect him and his payments, nothing at all, while they perform these miserable, ridiculous, unnecessary, just horrendous ID checks, completely unnecessary. And because they don't have the facilities, they don't have the people to perform these checks and go out to people's houses, they're making it his problem. If this was a company in the private sector, the company would fold, because what they're doing is they're making the company problem the customer's fault. Not just the customer's problem, but they're almost blaming the customer for this. Well, if you can't come in, your payments stop. It's a thinly veiled threat, isn't it? Well, not thinly veiled at all. How many disabled people are going to have to struggle in to offices when they can barely walk, barely move? How many people will just be in absolute fear and go into untold levels of stress, etc., because they're so worried they won't get their payments in time? He hasn't been given a date for some miserable person from the DWP, some officious person, to come out and prove that he is who he says he is. He hasn't had a date for this yet. So, how long? How long will he be waiting? Days, weeks, months? What are we talking here? How long is he supposed to go without money? What's he supposed to do in the meantime? So he's really stressed. His family are understandably stressed. He's only got his mum and his aunts to help. And his aunt used to work for the job centre, so that's why she got involved, because she has an idea of the systems, and she thought she'd sorted it with regards to a home visit, and she'd not been able to do that. And she's a very clued up woman, so if she couldn't do that, it gives an idea of perhaps the level of incompetence within the system at the moment, and that's just to get ID checks, just to ensure that he gets the money that he's entitled to, that he should have, in order to live. But then you throw in the cuts to the system at the moment. You throw in the cuts to PIP and to ESA and all of that, which, well, are affecting people moving across to universal credit as well. Some people are finding that their payments have been cut on universal credit as well. And it's not acceptable. You know, it's horrific. None of us should be okay with this situation. And to me, my view, this situation, it's like a sort of hangover from the olden days when you had public schoolboy mentality, and which you still do, unfortunately, amongst some MPs, etc. And the idea that there's a very strict hierarchy, you know, and if you're middle to upper class, you're okay. But if you're disabled, then you fall into a sort of Untermensch, you fall into a sort of very lower class system. And they're brought up, aren't they, in a very sort of cold way. You don't often see MPs who are heartfelt. You know, they're very cold, they're very calculated sometimes. All to do with the sort of public school system that we've got in the UK, as far as I can see. You know, it cuts people off from their hearts. And there's this hangover from the Enlightenment days when we first got into the idea that science should have primacy over everything else. It seemed apparent that feelings and looking after people and compassion and all of that were very low down, you know, that we had this dog eat dog mentality whereby people think that it's survival of the fittest, and therefore there is always collateral damage. And lower classes, what's deemed to be lower classes, what's, you know, people who can't work, disabled people, all of that are deemed a sort of level of lower class and thus collateral damage. You can just let them go, you know, and then it's just money for everybody else. And it goes without saying that that's a horrific mentality. It's a real sort of ugliness in the human condition. And you'd like to think we're past that. Here we are, 2025. That isn't acceptable. It's not acceptable. However financially hard up the country might be, you don't accept that there's going to be a level of horrifying poverty and worse amongst the disabled people who have to deal with these cuts. You know, already there are some disabled people who aren't getting the care and the help that they should be getting because they can't afford their own care. So they're not living the way they should live. They're not having the right level of care. And that's happening already. You throw these cuts into the equation and it gets a lot worse. And unfortunately, there's a lot of myths perpetuated too. So, for example, there's an article recently, apparently in the Daily Telegraph, which I've not read, which apparently slams benefits cheats and all of this and say Keir Starmer isn't going far enough and all the rest of it. Bloody horrific article. I'm really disgusted if that has indeed been written in such a way. As I say, I haven't read it. But that's a hangover of just lazy journalism. It's just ideas perpetuated for many years. Every now and again you see an article like that. Let's blame everything on the disabled. Let's blame everything on people out of work. Yeah, they're the reason we're in trouble economically. Let's bash them. Let's take away even more of their benefits, etc. It's all their fault that they're not in work. You know, they're just lazy, etc. And these are very outmoded, outdated, horrifying attitudes, really ignorant. And it just makes me angry that a newspaper like The Telegraph, which is supposed to be, you know, quite an intelligent newspaper, perpetuates a lazy myth like that. They need to wake the hell up. And they need to see the bigger picture here because, as I say, Ian Duncan Smith and his changes to the system made things really inhumane. So they probably didn't read the blog Another Angry Voice back in the day, but I did. And Another Angry Voice was a blogger who just catalogued some of the utter catastrophes and utter acts of cruelty, you know, that were happening as a result of benefit cuts and things back in the day under the Tories. And the worst one that stood out, there were many horrifying instances, people being in hospital receiving letters to say, if you don't turn up at the job centre on Monday, you're having your benefits cut. And they're in hospital having quite serious operations and so on. And that, you know, the worst one that I read was a person who'd had allegedly a double lung and heart transplant, and they received a letter to say, you're not at the job centre Monday morning, bright and early, you know, you're going to have your benefits cut, and that's it. And it goes without saying, you shouldn't have that level of stress if you've had a serious operation or any operation. We need to look after people, not penalise them for not being able to work, etc. You can't work now, you're useless to us, you are expendable, you know, and I'm sounding like I'm making light of this, but I'm not. It's horrifying. It's a horrifying attitude. And again, it just ties up the idea that you only have worth in a society if you can earn money and give something back in taxes, and that's your worth, that's a measure of your worth. Well, we know, right? We know a bit more than that. That's a very ignorant view as well. We know that humans, animals, any living being has worth intrinsically just because it's alive, just because it has consciousness flowing through it. And we know in an ideal world, we'd seek to protect any and all life. The world isn't ideal, but we must seek to protect all life anyway, with everything that we have. And we must seek to protect the most vulnerable people who can't advocate for themselves. It's not their fault that they're disabled. We mustn't seek to penalise them and make their lives even more hard, even more horrible in some instances than they already are. For some people with disabilities, life is often just a roller coaster of hospital appointments, trying to manage their pain, trying to just find a reason to live, let alone a reason to smile throughout a day. And then you throw in an absolutely inhumane system, an impersonal system, where you can barely get through to speak to anyone, where you're just a number in a baffling system that gives you a great deal of anxiety and uncertainty as to whether or not you're going to qualify for anything, let alone the full amount that you should qualify for. Throw in a phone line that no one can get through on, and, you know, it makes it even worse. It's really horrifying. And what the journalist in the Telegraph failed to understand, what a lot of people fail to understand, is that because the system was made so much worse under the Tories, and because we effectively just have a two-party system in the UK at the moment, apart from what's going on with reform, when Labour come along, it's their duty. They have a duty of care to undo any inhumanity and to seek to protect the people who can't protect themselves. That was old Labour, right? Some people in old Labour would have exemplified those sort of values and looked after its citizens, even the people that cannot take care of themselves, and especially those people, because that's just what a humane society does. That's just what a caring, compassionate society does. Right? No man left behind, no man, woman or child left behind. Come on, let's do this. Let's seek to make sure that people get the right care that they need, that they have the respect, the dignity. They're people too. And it isn't their fault that they're disabled. Disabilities can happen to anyone. You know, no one is immune from the potential of a disability just striking out of the blue one day. No one is immune to this. So the bigger picture here is that Labour needed to be the party to come in and to undo the horrifying levels of inhumanity that had been inflicted upon people at the lowest, at the most vulnerable. They needed to be the ones to come in and redress that balance. At the very least, put things back to where they were pre-Ian Duncan Smith. But what's happened is Keir Starmer and his buddies have come in, and not only have they not sought to redress the balance, they seem to have decided that a great portion of society, elderly and the disabled and people who are unable to work, are now collateral damage, that they can just be let go, that they're expendable because they're not working. When you hear him when you hear Keir Starmer bang on about the working people, we support the working people, you start to realise what's going on here. You have value in his eyes only if you work. If you stop working, you have no value. That's horrifying. That's not what we want in a leader. We need that compassion, And people at the top of the chain, at the food chain, might think that it's fine. They might think, well, I'm all right, Jack. Doesn't matter if other people aren't. But what they fail to realise is we're all of us impoverished spiritually by such a decision. If we live in a country that does not seek to care for people, that actively seeks to harm them, because this system is not helpful, in some cases it seems to be harmful, we're all of us spiritually impoverished by living in such a system. It isn't uplifting. It isn't helpful. It's nothing to aspire to here. It has no aspirational potential. It's simple dog eat dog, let the lowest, the perceived lowest, let them go, and then we all just carry on. Who wants to live in that world? Who wants to live in that world? It's disgusting. It has echoes of Hitler's Germany, because I believe disabled people were also seen to be in such a way, which is why I use the word Untermensch, the sort of absolutely seen to be something expendable, horrifying idea. And we know that road, we know where that goes. And I'm not saying that we're necessarily going to follow a particular path, but it's very easy to other great swathes of the population. And the moment you get into that mindset, into that mentality, it's a very, very dangerous place to go. Very dangerous place to go. And it should be anti everything that we stand for as a species. The idea is, isn't it, that we continue to evolve. We continue to evolve ideas, and we continue to evolve as a species. And I think most people would agree that the evolution of humanity is not going to be by us walking on the bones of those who've been deemed expendable, but rather that we try to lift up everyone, and that we operate with great love and great compassion. And they seem to me to be the values of the future. That seems to be the way that we move forward. We're in a horrible place at the moment. People beating the drum of war, talking about Third World War and God knows what. We're in a precarious place as a species. We're deforesting the earth. Rainforests are the lungs of the planet. And we're in a grip of extreme darkness. And I do believe there's a spiritual war at play here. I really, really do. I think there is a lot of hope for humanity, but that hope comes from each and every one of us. And it's the love that we carry inside of ourselves, because love is far stronger than any darkness, however big the darkness is on our planet. And it is big right now, So it's just, it beggars belief. It really beggars belief. But there is a lot of ignorance out there. There's a lot of myths perpetuated that everybody who claims benefits is a scrounger and shouldn't be claiming them, And a lot of people think, quite reasonably, oh, well, our leaders wouldn't leave anyone out in the cold. They're only going to come after benefits for people who claim illegally, who shouldn't be claiming. And that's a reasonable assumption to make, isn't it? If you're a reasonable-minded person you're going to imagine that your government is equally reasonably minded, because to imagine otherwise is horrifying, but also might be seen to be conspiracy minded or something like that. We have to assume that people want the best for other people, that people aren't so bloody minded, that aren't so greedy and desperate that they will seek to let millions of people starve to death or whatever, and just to enable them to keep living a very pampered lifestyle. You know, that's horrifying. No one wants to think people are being like that. But there's, you know, somewhere in between is probably the truth. And the truth is probably that governments are just very cold-hearted. And so they can reduce people to statistics, be a bit cold, be a bit offhand, and keep it impersonal. You know, if they knew someone with a disability themselves and knew their personal story of how much it affected them, chances are, you know, unless they are actually psychopathic, they're going to feel something. It's going to make them feel something, and they're going to feel as though they need to actually act on this and take care of people. And they always seem to chance their arm by trying to denigrate and devalue the people who can't fight back. So the poorest people, the most vulnerable people, the disabled people. You know, there's a very easy answer to our financial situation. Well, seemingly straightforward. And that's just to claw back money that is lost through tax avoidance and tax evasion and such things. And maybe that seems too simplistic an idea. Maybe it's too easy. Maybe then all the rich people would just disappear to other countries. But I'm sure that some money could be claimed back in such a way. And I'm sure that that would far outweigh whatever monies they think they can claw back from people with disabilities, etc. The system for people with disabilities needs an overhaul. It needs somebody to look at it with deep, deep compassion. There needs to be safeguards in place. So for people like the person I look after who's had a stroke, who's not going to grow a new limb, you know, there needs to be deep compassion for him. There needs to be notes on a system so he doesn't have to have repeated reviews, etc. And with anyone in that situation, you know, I think it was noted on the comments on a charity on Facebook recently. It was pointed out that veterans too have this problem if they've lost limbs, etc. So they go and fight for their country, they come back, and they're caught in this system too, where they have to prove their disability again and again and again and again. And if they, again, don't have limbs, etc., they're not growing back. You know, you've got that disability, it's for life, and then it's a case of how to manage that, and how to manage that giving them the dignity and respect and care that they deserve. And these should be cornerstones. These should be sort of pillars of our support system. And if they're not in place, then the system is seriously inhumane. And it does seem to be that it contravenes the Care Act 2014. So that's legislation that should absolutely safeguard vulnerable adults, disabled people, etc. Across the board. It should ensure their safety, their care. And some years ago, the person I look after had mentioned the Care Act to their local council. And the local council had sort of pushed back against that and just said, well, we see the Act more as guidelines rather than law. But they're wrong. As far as I know, it's the law. It just seems a bit insane that people would want to push back against an act which seeks to protect and care for, you know, the most vulnerable people in society. So that's what you're up against. That's how local councils are trying to dodge and get out of things, I believe. And you've heard stories, I'm sure, of job centres too. You know, there've been many stories that I've read online of people in job centres who are given incentives to not give people their money, their benefits, and to find reasons not to. All sorts of reasons, you know, whether valid or whether not valid. the incentive is very much on not giving people benefits that they need. And yes, of course, there are going to be benefit scroungers out there. Of course there are. But you don't make the system completely bloody-minded and hideous for everyone just because of the few that are getting through the cracks who shouldn't be. You know, you have to find a better way to weed those people out without harming, without distressing and demeaning, dehumanising the people who do deserve those benefits, who do need that level of care. You know, there's got to be a balance, and it's got to be compassion-based. It's got to be a compassion-based system. So people feel supported and valued, no matter what they can bring, to the country in terms of how they can contribute to the economy. We're more than that. We're more than simple pound signs on our heads. We are human, you know. We are part of an infinite, eternal, loving consciousness expressing itself subjectively through this temporary vessel of this human skin until we go up and get recycled and come back down and do it all again, because I'm a believer in reincarnation. That's what we are. So to demean people in such a way, it makes it even more horrifying, you know. It makes it even more horrifying. The system is so broken. It's just awful. So if you're watching this, and if you can spare 5 minutes to email your local MP, please do that. And if you can, just read some comments in X. There's a few campaigners on there who are just telling it like it is. You know, take some time out, do some research. And if you work for the Daily Telegraph, for the love of God, please do some research yourself. Please interview some people on disabilities. Ask them how it's going for them, porting across to universal credit. You know, I understand that you want to believe in the system, that you want to believe in all of these sort of perpetuated lies in the great unwashed, the idea that to claim benefits you must be somehow less of a human being, but that's a hangover from a time that no longer exists, you know. And you need to wake up, smell the coffee, realise they are people like you. They have every right to the same dignity and care that you would hope for yourself. You know, we all need to get involved. We all need eyes wide open for this one, because they seem to be trying to push the bill through, you know, to get these benefits slashed. And then next year, it's really going to affect people. People who've been told that they can move across to universal credit, well, they have to. Most people have to now, are told that their benefits should, I believe, in most cases, be protected on the level that they were getting for 1 year. 1 year. And then what happens? What after that? What happens after that? They're all protected from a year, and then what? They get no benefits? They get halved? What? These are people who want to live in a decent way, in a home, in a flat, etc. Are you condemning them to, you know, a life on the street in tents, which we're increasingly seeing now? You know, if you want any idea as to how broken society is, just check out sort of tent cities. You know, people living in their mobile homes, people living in tents, both here and in America, and in places you wouldn't expect, you know, in the middle of London, you know, in parks in London, or at least one. I saw quite a few tents on a YouTube video the other day. You know, people can't afford to live just normal lives anymore. Increasing amounts of people can't afford what we would consider basic benefits or basic tenets to a normal life, right? Being able to have a roof over your head so you can keep warm in winter, being able to wash yourself in a dignified way, being able to feed yourself and clothe yourself, having access to healthcare, having access to to work, to a place of education, etc., having all the rights that we have come to expect in a so-called first world country. You know, there's something deeply, deeply wrong at the heart of society, and it needs all hands on deck. We need to look at it. We can't fix what we don't look at. You know, this has gone on for so many years and myths have just been perpetuated for so many years. But what this Labour government are doing now is potentially a death sentence for some people with disabilities, and for others it's just terrifying, depressing, horrifying, and completely soul destroying. And it might cost them decent nutrition, it might cost them a roof over their heads, and it might shorten their lives in some cases. None of that is acceptable. So please, if you've watched this far, thank you very much for watching. Please have a little look at what's going on out there. Please have a little look and then email your MP. If you do only one thing this week that's charity based, you know, why not make it that? Because not just for the fact that one day you yourself could become disabled if you're not already, but also just because it's the right thing to do. It's like we should be looking at this basic level of care just because it's the right thing to do. And if the Labour government are that hard up, then they need to get their heads together and find other ways to claw back some of this money. And, you know, there's got to be another way. This should be the last straw, and it shouldn't even be that. At no point should a government completely capitulate and go, well, you know what, we've got a £22 billion black hole. What should we do? Throw the disabled at it. Yeah, that's a good idea. And the elderly too. Yeah, we'll do that. These were like the first things that they've done. These were their first. They wasn't even like they tried other avenues. They gave it a couple of years. They tried, you know, raising taxes, or they tried to do other things and claw back money in other ways. No. This is the first measures they took. And that should tell you everything you need to know about this government, about where they stand in a humanitarian stance. And that makes it terrifying, considering we are a two-party country. Because if not them, who? You know, the Tories they didn't look after the people that needed it. Labour, it was left to them, and they have badly dropped the ball. You know, they have fumbled it. They are horrifying. I would never vote Labour again. And I used to vote for them. And I used to vote for them, fun enough, because many years ago when I didn't know who to vote for, and I consulted a mate, and this person just said to me, you know what? When I struggle with who to vote for, I always vote for the party that looks to protect those with the least, that looks to protect the most vulnerable, because you know then that their compass is in the right direction. You know that they're a kind, caring party, and that's what we need. And that was many years ago they said that. And that's what I used to do. And now who? Who's gonna pick up the ball with this? Who's gonna look after these people? You know, reform won't. I pretty much guarantee it, you know. So then we look at, say, the Green Party, and we look to them perhaps. But I will never vote Labour again based upon this. I didn't vote for them last time around, and I would never vote for them again now. And it's all thanks to these policies, because the level of humanitarianism just isn't there. So yeah, so that's my little thoughts for today. Hope you're well, hope you're having a good week. Thank you for watching, and take care, and God bless.